The day began with the shipping forecast, as it always did when the wind had opinions. In kitchens and wheelhouses, in taxis, on the A30, and in a bakery queue where the glass steamed with human weather, voices paused to let that small, perfect liturgy pass through them. FitzRoy, Gale 8, increasing severe Gale 9, Storm 10. Rain, then squally showers. Good, occasionally poor. In Newlyn Harbour, the water moved under the boats like a giant, remembering its own breathing. Mooring lines creaked, gulls sounded insulted by everything. Tom Travaskis stood on the deck of the Tamarisk with a mug going cold against his palm, and a look that made his crew keep one eye on him and one on the sky. They had been out twice this week and come back with catches a little too honest to pay for diesel. The hake had slid further west with the chill, and the mackerel were capricious. The buyers down on the quay had shrugged that complicated shrug of men who can't pay what they don't have and can't admit it. One more push, Tom told himself. One more line on the plotter, a little further in blue, where the seabed kinks into bank and drop, and they might buy the month a bit of dignity. Jay Patel arrived with his rucksack and that careful grin of a man trying to be useful while not taking up space. Birmingham kid, 24, 2 months into sea time and still learning how to walk on a moving world. He had hands happy to work, and a way with knots that suggested childhood afternoons with scout manuals and patience. He'd only been seasick once so far. He was determined not to give the ocean the satisfaction again. "Morning, skipper," Jay said. "Barometer's sulking." "It'll do worse before lunch," Tom said, without looking up. "Get the kettle on." Piran's bringing the ice. Piran, Peter Thomas to HMRC, and no one else, came across the quay like a trawler in boots, barrel-chested, beard salted by decades. Engineer, deck boss, keeper of unflappable faces. He had a superstition about leaving with a dirty deck, a superstition about coming in on a Sunday, and a superstition against discussing superstition. He put the ice aboard with a grace surprising for a man his size and thumped Jay on the shoulder without malice. "Met says 10, Piran said. "Met often says things to feel important," Tom replied, but his thumb rubbed the mug's rim like someone looking for a lucky edge. He checked the plotter again. The screen showed the Cornish peninsula reaching out its finger toward the weather like a brave or foolish child. Beyond it, the sea area names formed a rosary. Seoul, Fastnet, FitzRoy, where the numbers had begun to lean. A tightness around the ISO bars, a curl in the low that made forecasters clear their throats. Tom's partner, Isla, texted just as they loosed from the pontoon. "Don't be heroic. Be back." He responded with the ship emoji he always sent, as if that could count as a promise. He looked back up the hill to where their small semi hung on the slope, like a shy tooth, the upstairs window winking pale. He thought about boilers and school shoes and the way Isla listened to the world at night when he was away, hearing inevitably 100 storms that never arrived. They turned out past Mouse Hole, and the longships opened the horizon, wolfish and polite in sunlight that made everything look kinder than it felt. The swell had a long, heavy stride. The Tamarisk rolled as though remembering dances from an earlier life. Jay braced and tried to make his feet into faith. By midday, the first hauls were grudging. A good monkfish here, a sulky sprawl of hake there, enough mackerel to tease, and not enough to boast. Piran kept the gear working with mild threats. Jay learned the deck's particular grammar, the way everything meant more than itself out here. Tom watched the wind freshen, watched cloud build like bruises. The radio doled out little truths. Gale 9 imminent, then a pause the exact length of a swallowed lie. Then perhaps not imminent, but certain. Then perhaps not certain, but likely. In the way of all weather, it wasn't the numbers that put fear into men, but the tone of the voices tasked with reading them. At 1400, the starling called up. Morwenna Bale, that was her. Maury to everyone who had watched her drive trucks on the quay before she could legally drive anything, and a skipper who had earned her hat one filthy winter hauling crab farther north than sense would encourage. There had been a summer once with her and Tom and too many ciders and an argument about everything. They had come out of it with respect and a mutual refusal to buy each other lunch. "Tamarisk, starling," Maury's voice said, clean as a knife. "You reading me?" "Go ahead." "You see the Met Extra?" "Stingjet possible. Looks like the nose is sharpening off the tail. I'm tucking behind the bank. You might fancy it." Tom glanced at the screen, at the low wound tighter than a fist, at the place where pressure lines stacked like the pages of a book someone didn't want you to finish. The word Stingjet had a particular tang, a part of a deepening cyclonic system, a sliver of air slashing down with sudden malice out of an otherwise predictable script. Fast and local and cruel. "Copy," Tom said. "One more tow, and we'll join you." "Copy," Maury said, and left the open channel uncluttered with the thing she might have added. One more tow is the sort of phrase you later call a hinge. They shot the gear again, the net opening like a promise as it went. Piran frowned at the engine's idle mutter, a note in it like a throat clearing. Jay fetched tea he forgot to drink. The Tamarisk trundled her line, and the sky crowded in with a wind that had decisions to announce. When they hauled back, the bag swelled with a heavy, reluctant wealth. Hack, monk, a sulk of ling. Even a stowaway turbot trying to look like a joke. Piran laughed in that one-syllable way of men who've learned to make sound carry meaning. Jay whooped because some joys are exactly as simple as they seem. Tom's jaw unclenched. "Right," Tom said. And in that right, there was the rent and the diesel and a school trip he hadn't told Isla he'd pay for yet. "We'll get this aboard," and then the radio cracked with a voice that had accidentally discovered how to beg. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is the fishing vessel Little Meg, 14 miles west-northwest of Seven Stones. Gear foul on prop, 2 souls on board, ship in water." The rest dissolved into a noise like a person trying not to scream underwater. The 3 men on the Tamarisk stopped for the very briefest fraction. The mind allows you when the world insists on joining your plan. The Seven Stones were off to the northeast, treacherous rocks with a lighthouse that had listened to more prayers than any church in 3 counties. 14 miles west-northwest of that put the stricken boat between where they were and where the weather was sharpening its teeth. "Coast Guard, Little Meg." "Say again your position," came a clipped voice, the kind chosen for calmly breaking bad news. Piran's eyes found Tom's. Jay's did too. He had the sort of face that said what his words were too careful to attempt. Tom did arithmetic against his ribs. He thought about how long they had, about chop turning to wall, about the angle he'd need against the steepening sea, about how much weight the Tamarisk had to throw about if things went ugly. He thought about a night 20 years ago when a man with his surname had not come back, and how the village had practiced condolences it had been too used to. "Gear aboard," he said. "Now." Piran moved before the order finished breathing. Jay moved with him, because that had become the habit of his body out here, to be useful in the patterns set by older hands. They got the net on, fish into the pound, deck as clear as a deck out here gets. Tom swung the bow toward trouble. "Starling, tamarisk," he said, thumb on transmit. "Go," Maury said. "You near 7 stones?" "Closer to Wolf Rock. This weather's quick feet." "Copy that. We've a mayday between us and the stones. Little Meg, 2 aboard, prop fouled." "Roger," Maury said. "Heli's spinning up at base, but Culdrose won't like that line. We're on the move." "Copy." Tom set the throttle like a man setting a jaw. The tamarisk bit into the sea. It was a different ocean now. The swell had lost its kindness, the crests breaking like crockery against the hull. Rain stitched the air. The tamarisk shouldered it, not elegantly, but with familiarity. Piran took his place at the engine and hummed his little-nothing songs, which meant the world was still within the boundaries of his experience. Jay strapped in and moved where Piran pointed and blinked against spray that salted his eyelashes white. The little Meg came into sight and then went away again, each appearance brief, a child popping up in a cornfield. A small inshore boat, cheerful in fine weather and punished by this. The bow lifted like a plea. The stern sagged toward the water, with that dangerous, preposterous hope the sea gives you that maybe it is elected to spare you if you are polite. "Little Meg, tamarisk to your southwest," Tom called. "We're coming up on your quarter." "2 aboard," confirmed. "2," returned a voice catching air in barbs. "Prop's got the net, like it owes it money." "Copy," Tom said. He thought about the angles again, about what weight to wear and what to shed. He looked at the pound full of tomorrow's bills and let out a breath that hurt in the throat. "Piran, dump it," he said. Piran didn't blink. He opened the pound and watched money sluice across the deck and over the side, fish flashing once like coins in a story about greed and consequence. Jay swore, softly, the way someone swears when told why, but still needing to hear it aloud. "Light as we can," Tom said, to no one and everyone. They came alongside as much as alongside means, in a sea insisting you don't. Piran had a line ready with a snap hook on it, coiled like a live thing. The little Meg's man, the skipper presumably, back-bent into years he hadn't earned yet, threw and missed and threw again, and this time the rope made a sound that meant promise. "Hold her," Tom said, voice low, kind. He put the tamarisk where Piran's hands said space would be in 3 seconds, and where Jay's eyes said fear currently was. The small boat yawed. The sea enjoyed it. Piran got the line on and took strain with the authority of a church bell. The boats banged a little like unfriendly neighbors in a terraced row. "Lad first," Piran shouted, because that is the order in a crisis when nothing argues otherwise. The younger of the 2 men, on the little Meg, 20, if he had ever seen a razor, bulked into a life jacket and came across the gap with a fall and a prayer. Jay grabbed him, and the deck received them both in a heavy tangle. Piran secured the line again. The next crossing would be angrier. Tom felt the rain turn to something harder on his face and tasted the iron in it the way miners taste air. "Skipper!" Jay shouted, because the older man had decided something brave and idiotic, that seeing his boat clear of the net was more important than his bones. He had a boat hook out and was jabbing at the snarl round the prop, doing the sort of thing that sometimes comes off in stories you tell in pubs and sometimes gets you sainted on a bench plaque. "Leave it," Tom bellowed, a voice he rarely loaned to the world. Leave it and move. The older man looked once at the shaft of the boat hook, at the oily black twist of net cutting into the sea like gilt into a stomach, then at the tamarisk and the men on her, and the weather above them all. He swallowed. He threw the hook away and gathered himself for the jump that would make him just a person again and not a skipper, which is often the heavier leap. He went on 3. On 2, a wave lifted the little Meg and rolled her shoulder so that where there had been the suggestion of a path, there was now only the sort of space that laughs after it spits you out. The man leapt anyway, because sometimes the body moves on the count it was promised. He hit the rail with his ribs, and his right leg went between Hull and Hope. Jay moved without asking his experience if it agreed. He grabbed the man's jacket and shouted, and Piran let go of safety to hold together a world. And Tom put the tamarisk where physics made space for mercy, grinding his teeth into the boat so she'd know he meant it. The sea took a breath as if to argue. Between one heavy blink and the next, the leg came free. The man thumped aboard and lay there, considering the idea of any god at all, blood making a thick, serious map on his trouser. Inside, Piran said, pushing human shapes toward warmth. He tied off. He checked the line again. He didn't say good or well done or even okay. He didn't need to. He was a man who spoke fluent continuation. The little Meg lurched and then canted a degree too far north of Wise. The line went light in Piran's hands, like a joke that had ceased to be funny. The small boat hung a moment on indecision, and then the sea took its vote. She rolled, she filled, she became not a boat. They stood in the rain a second longer than logic asked for, honoring the passing of an object that had been the point of 2 men's days. Piran shook the line free. The sea, generous as always with permanence, looked exactly the same as it had a minute ago. Coast Guard tamarisk, Tom said, mouth dry. 2 souls recovered from little Meg. 1 leg injury, stable for now. Requesting vectors to nearest sensible. He didn't say harbour. The wind had opinions about harbours. Tamarisk, Coast Guard. Thank you for that. Cold Rose Hilo en route, but pushing limits. RNLI from Senon launching. Advise shelter behind Wolf Rock if you can reach. After that, your call, Newlyn or St. Ives, depending on your nose. Copy, Tom said. He put Tamarisk toward the suggestion of a lee, and the boat approved, shoulders dropping a shade as the rock took some insult out of the water. He could feel the storm tugging like a thief at his coat. He could feel his father's absence and the weight of his own name, and the way Isla had written "be back" without anything to brace it. The helicopter came like a wasp, furious with the concept of rain. It hung over them with improbable contempt for physics, threw a cable down like a question mark, and winched the injured man up with a grace that had been practiced enough times to look inevitable. The younger man squeezed Jay's shoulder before going, a quick, surprised gratitude as if he'd not expected the world to find him worth its trouble. The winchman saluted in that informal way of people who know the limits of ritual in weather. Good work, Tamarisk, the pilot said. Get yourself home. Home. The word had the shape of a kitchen in it, the heat of a radiator, the sound of Isla's fork on a plate. Tom set the nose of the Tamarisk where home lived behind the dark. The storm became itself full, a brute with opinions about angles. The boat crawled up hills and slid down them, honest and noisy. Piran sang a bit louder now. Jay learned a new layer of fear and a new layer of competence at the same speed. Maury's Starling ghosted into view on their starboard, then vanished, then returned nearer, keeping pace with the sort of silent conversation boats have when their skippers used to share Saturdays. Once, through a clear sheet of air, Tom saw Maury on her wheel, and she lifted a hand, and he lifted his, and there was something in the gesture less like greeting and more like vow. Behind Wolf Rock, the world became slightly less vindictive. Sennon's lifeboat punched out to meet them, orange and righteous in her purpose, crew in helmets making humor with their eyes because their mouths were busy with the sea. They took the long wave of the approach without apology. If you were going to get home today, you were going to come on terms, the water understood. They made it past the long ships, and the sea softened by tiny degrees, like a furious person remembering they had loved you once. Newlyn opened with its huddle of lights and its knowledge of salt. The Tamarisk came into the harbour hesitant and then sure, a horse smelling the stable. People appeared because people always do when weather has a story to tell. The lifeboat gave them a shove that felt like kindness. Ropes ashore. Cleats. A deck under your feet that remembered how to be still. Isla was there with hair escaping its clip and a look that tried to be sensible and failed. Tom climbed down with knees that had opinions and found her arms before he found her words. Jay stood a little away, letting the world fit itself back around its edges. Piran kicked a coil of line into something that would please him later and allowed himself a small, private smile, the kind that old men wear when the sea has been reminded respectfully that she can be lost to. Maury came alongside and called across that irritatingly neutral "all right," which in Cornish can hold a thesis. Tom nodded in the way of men who will not give the weather more attention than they have already donated. He raised a hand. She raised hers. Enough. They went home, and the storm battered the windows for hours, as if practice makes permanence. The shipping forecast came again. Late, companionable, unruffled. FitzRoy, storm 10 decreasing gale 8, later 6, rain then fair, a small mercy in the small hours. In the morning, Newlyn was a place where people described the night with eyebrows and palms. The buyers pursed their lips at pound totals and then remembered that pound totals were not the only tally. Someone put pasties on the Tamarisk's hatch like an apology the weather owed no one but accepted anyway. Tom walked the quay with coffee and unfastened shoulders. He ran his fingers over the scuffed rail where a man had hit with both ribs and decision. He thought about money thrown back to the sea and came to the conclusion he always came to when his life and his job argued, that the figures only behave if you keep breathing. Jay found him with a shy, urgent energy. "Skipper," he said, "can I mean, thanks. For dumping the catch, for not, you know." Tom nodded. He looked at the horizon where the edge of the world had gone back to pretending to be reasonable. "The sea keeps accounts we don't see," he said. "Best not to owe her too much." Piran arrived with a roll of tape and a replacement opinion for the bilge sensor. "We'll call the new net Mercy," he said, as if discussing paint. "Might put the wind in a better temper." Jay grinned. "Do nets have tempers?" "Everything does if you listen long enough," Piran said, and thumped the rail where men had survived and boats had held. "Get the kettle on." No one's heroic after tea. The day moved the way days do when the worst thing has failed to happen. Ela texted a photograph of toast with too much jam. Maury sent across a spare impeller because honor has hands. The Tamarisk's deck steamed a little in weak sun. Gulls returned to their usual jobs of complaining like MPs. When the shipping forecast came at dusk, it sounded less like a verdict and more like a lullaby. Tom stood at the wheel and listened to the names said in order, the old, strange catechism of a country that is at its edges defined by water. He thought about a boy from Birmingham who had not panicked, about an old man who had let go of a boat hook, about a leg that would heal, about fish brilliant and forgettable, making a brief passage through his life. Good, becoming moderate, the voice said, reasonable as most, visibility good. He put his palm on the wheel as if to thank it. He looked out over a harbour that had held against a hard night and said, to no one and all of it, right. Not a hinge this time, just continuation. The honest work of going and returning in a place where both are achievements. The wind shifted. Somewhere out beyond FitzRoy, a new low began to think about itself. In kitchens and wheelhouses, men and women listened and arranged their days around what could be borne and what could be braved. The tamarisk settled against her lines, a dog at heel. Tom went home. The kettle sang. The house smelled of damp wool and relief. He sat at the table and counted the blessings he could spend.